first of all, welcome to everybody attending the webinar. My name is Sean Smalley. I'm the CTO at Achieve Internet. I've been doing enterprise software architecture and solution design and construction for about 25 years now. Started off back in Perl CGI days back in 1996, building early web applications, and have really been with the growth of the internet over that time. And so today, just formal, we're having a very, very casual chit chat between the four of us about API security and what our concerns and best practices are. But I want to kind of remind everybody that is attending, please post your questions in the chat room. We'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end of this session, and the webinar administrator will be reviewing those and bringing those up for us occasionally as we go through. So I want to start off, little bit of introductions for the panelists. So I'm going to start off with Sachin Kaura, from the solution architect from Google Apigee.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you're attending. So glad to be here. And my name is Sachin. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, and I'm a solution architect working with Google, specializing on Google's Apigee API management platform, which is a great platform to help organizations to embark upon the digital transformation journey, which can eventually help in enhancing the end user experience, providing omni-channel, bringing in operational and supply chain efficiency. So I'm glad to be here, and I welcome all the attendees to this webinar today.
Okay, and next we have Byron Williams, the principal engineer and API evangelist at Allstate.
Yes, thanks, Sean. Like Sachin, I'm glad to be here with everyone to talk about, API security. My background, I've been at Allstate a little over 4 years now. I joined Allstate as the product manager for the Allstate Roadside Services APIs, which is a digital set of APIs that bring a digital roadside experience to the marketplace. So imagine, if you will, if you're stuck on the side of the road, you use your app and you get a service, whether it's a tow, tire change, etc., all digitally via the application. So you get that Uber Lyft-like experience of that rescue coming to rescue you on site. And recently, I've heading up the API Center for Enablement here at Allstate. So sort of to take a look at APIs across the enterprise, which is a pretty vast endeavor, but it allows us to work on best practices, deliver a consistent set of APIs, which we'll talk a little bit about today, and then the security concerns around doing this across an entire enterprise. So I'm looking forward to chatting with the folks on the panel here, because they each bring a certain level of background and intelligence in the area that they're in. So thanks for having me today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, fantastic. And then we have Dan Barahona, the CMO and VP of Business for APIsec.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and pleased to join Byron and Sachin here on today's call. I had quite a different journey into security. I actually started my career in a very different kind. I was a safety and crashworthiness engineer at General Motors. So I would actually crash test vehicles and design airbag systems. So a different kind of security, and somehow I managed to pivot that into cybersecurity about 20 years ago. And I've been at sort of cybersecurity vendor side ever since. So companies like Qualys, ArcSight, Anomaly, and more recently a company called APIsec. And as the name suggests, our focus is API security, automated testing, really trying to find those vulnerabilities that exist within APIs before they make it into production. So I've had the pleasure to meet with a lot of folks out there and hear their struggles and challenges and how they're approaching security. So hoping to bring some of that here today to the discussion.
Great, thank you, everybody, and it's a pleasure to have you all on this panel. So let's step back a little bit and just talk about the journey that's brought us here to having this conversation. Over the last 25 years, I'm using that as my baseline since that's where my experience is. I've really seen the a dramatic shift in the API landscape around how organizations view APIs. When I first started out, we were doing, small scale e-commerce, a little bit of business, government applications, things like that. People are trying to figure out how the web plays into business. And a lot of times APIs were just something that the development teams did themselves to facilitate their own internal works. There wasn't really much consideration about like, what are the outside ramifications of these APIs? They're thinking very low levels, building a web service, exposing a get user method or something like that to make something available to another application. So really at the beginning, there wasn't a whole lot of focus on like, what's the impact of having this exposed to a very large audience? And so over the years, I've really seen this transition as the internet has grown and organizations figure out new ways of leveraging their APIs and learning that they have all this robust capability in-house that they need, but it's all siloed and not connected to anything. And that as that expansion and usage has grown, we've seen like obviously the hackers and the attackers, internal and external, looking for ways to exploit those legacy systems. And a lot of times we almost take a retroactive approach, looking at things like after something happens. And we're really starting to see in the last couple of years, organizations take this shift to be much more proactive, trying to get out ahead of security concerns and and try to thwart the attacks before they can happen. We've seen things like the emergence of the OWASP top 10 security threats for web applications, and now more recently for API infrastructure. A lot of organizational and federal mandates around different types of security, as well as the establishment of different security standards. Open banking is being a really popular one that I've had conversations with a lot of customers about recently. So really thinking about like, how has this evolution of our APIs changed, and how does that really change our focus around the API security landscape and how we expand that capability outside of our development teams? And I wanted to kind of open it up to each of the panelists and let them talk a little bit about like the journeys that they've seen within their organizations or their clients. And I'm going to start with Byron on that one.
Well, the journey here at Allstate has been, one of since I've been here, it's been a very good journey in terms of our API first mindset. There's a lot of things that we're putting in place to help organize around all of the different aspects within Allstate. Allstate is a huge enterprise with a lot of different areas, all of them bringing different things to the table. But specific to this one, it's around developing a consistent way of doing things, right? Having best practices that kind of spread across the enterprise, as opposed to having APIs that are delivered to API consumers that don't have the same look and feel, that don't have the same ease of use, right? And so that's kind of where we are. We are in that part of our journey where we're looking more broadly in the enterprise with this API Center for Enablement to bring everybody together from the bottom up, not from the top down. So build a open source type of environment within Allstate, where we're all learning and bringing best practices and improving best practices so that we can deliver that consistent set of APIs to the industry. And as you say, the digital economy and APIs is huge. I was reading a state of APIs from Google, the one that Sachin and his team put out, and it talked about 80% of the internet's traffic is driven by APIs. If you think about that, that is huge. 80% of the traffic is going via an API. That means that the same challenges that we have here at Allstate around security, there's a lot of enterprises and a lot of folks on this call that have those same challenges. How do you protect these things? So I think it's a great journey. APIs are definitely at the heart of the digital revolution. Being a legacy insurance company, we have the over-the-tops that we're battling against, right? We have the Lemonade, the Clovers, the folks who are coming in with no brick and mortar, no agent, all digital, right? And so now we're fast forwarding to be able to, compete against some of these players who are going totally digital. So here at Allstate, it's a fun journey. It's a great journey. but it's not an easy journey. We hit our challenges, we hit our roadblocks, and we manage our way through them. But all in all, it's part of the API journey, right? The API first mindset. We adapted it wholeheartedly and moving forward on it.
Fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like you have a robust platform and a experience there. Just for like a scaling and sizing perspective, Byron, can you give us like some idea of like what the scale of your API program is there at Allstate? Just very broadly.
Very, very broadly. It differs from organization to organization. The one I'll talk to here is Allstate Roadside Services. That is the roadside services businesses that Allstate has. And the chances are, if you have a connected car device in your car from T-Mobile, from Verizon Home, and you ever had to use roadside service on your mobile app, on your connected car app, the back end is Allstate Roadside API. So when you need a tire change and you go to the app and say tire change, those APIs call into our back end. We digitally find a provider for you, just like you find an Uber or a Lyft driver, right? It's an open source background. We've got providers that are in our network. We have an open source model of providers who can deliver soft services to come out quickly to get your car open. And from a scale perspective, the number of rescues before I had left the roadside team were over 1.3 million rescues done digitally. That means that those phone calls did not have to, those rescues did not have to come to a call center, right? It was all done digitally. The person never had to open up a phone call with someone. And if you take a look at what that means that we can now take 1 million plus calls out of our call center, and it takes about 10 minutes to get a rescue going through a call center, right? And if you do the math, at $1 a minute, that's $10 for each call. We took out over 1.2 million calls. So that's the savings that we see in terms of a digital experience and starting to digitize things within Allstate. So Allstate Roadside Service is the one that I'm most familiar with regards to, just the scalability on the platform that we have and the ability to constantly scale this such that we can take on new partners who are delivering roadside and also be able to add other aspects. We have an insurance business, obviously. And so now insurance as a service, via APIs is something that team is working on, but it's all coming together under one API ecosystem. And so it has to be scalable, has to be robust, and it has to be secure.
Fantastic. Cool. Yeah. So how about Sachin? What have you seen from like the API journey the customers are going through there at Google, or how has Google's taken that journey?
Yeah, I mean, if we go back like 8 to 10 years, Sean, I mean, we all will agree that the API use cases, they have evolved alongside the proliferation of the connected experience, right, which span across different devices, right? So the growing number and the variety of customer touch points that we experience today have made the customer journey more complex for my customers or the customers that I've been working with, which requires organization to act upon the data from a series of customer interaction, right? So that's where the organizations are looking for a very mature and a comprehensive platform which can make that journey a real wonderful experience for the end customers, right? So something that can give a wow kind of an experience to the end customer. So that's what APIs bring onto the platform, onto the table for organizations, wherein organizations are leveraging APIs, and APIs are becoming a significant engine of business growth, whether you're talking about sales, you're talking about service, you're talking about marketing, operations. So APIs are becoming the backbone, and that has been a constant journey that we had been experiencing here at Google, working with our customers.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then Dan, what have you seen from your customers, and from that, what kind of journey are they going through?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the conversation here. So we work with a lot of different customers and hear what kind of journeys they're on. And when I joined the company, I kind of assumed our customers would all look like SaaS-based companies, and companies have been around for 5 years or less, or maybe a little longer. and quite the opposite, actually. We have a lot of Fortune 1000s, legacy companies, online, brick and mortar companies that are really adopting and embracing APIs as part of their modernization. And I just remember a conversation last week with a brick and mortar retailer that has now a very large e-commerce presence, and they were taking advantage of the pandemic to migrate a monolithic app into microservices and containers and the like, and so they're chipping away at this monolithic app and taking chunks of functionality out of it and turning it into microservices, and all of that driven by APIs. And what's interesting is the recognition that it's not enough to just simply create the code and add the functionality, but that security has to be woven in, because these are now becoming mission critical parts of the IT operation, right? How you run your back end, how you're storing sensitive data, managing transactions. And for sure, hackers out there are looking for ways to take advantage of these APIs. So in many respects, it's a two-sided coin, right? There's all the functional benefits, the efficiency benefits, the integration benefits, but it's also increasing our attack surface area. It's creating new channels for attacks to come in. And so, I'm glad to see that security is being taken so seriously. It's why we're having this discussion, and we have people attending. But it's interesting to see that it's not the domain of young SaaS-based companies. It really applies to everyone out there.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, and that's actually a really great feed into like the next topic for us. Is like with all the high-profile breaches that we've seen over the last couple of years. The SolarWinds one being one of the big ones recently. What are like the API security concerns that keep each of you up at night? What's your focus? Like, what's the thing that scares you the most that you're trying to get out in front of? And I'll start off with Sachin. What about you?
Sure, and that's a tough one, Sean, because security is not new to us. Security has been a core area of focus for us, no matter what kind of solution we talk about, no matter what kind of capabilities and platform we talk about. And here at Google, we take security pretty seriously, and we typically follow a defense in depth philosophy. When it comes to API, we extend the same philosophy with respect to APIs, because APIs encompasses network security concepts such as rate limiting, throttling, traffic shaping. It goes along the concepts of how do I secure the data while it is at rest or while it is at motion. And going forward, we will be seeing how we can secure the data while it is in use as well. So which is really great from a security perspective. How we can take care of identity-based security, as Don was talking about. There are so many notorious users out there, be it internal or external. How we can address security when it comes to identity, and how can we take proactive approach rather than taking reactive approach when it comes to monitoring, analytics, so on and so forth. So these are the things which are like left, right, and center to us when we talk about security. And from me, overall, API security is all about upholding the integrity, the confidentiality of APIs, both the ones that we use and also the one that we own as an API producer. So that's what I think about security, and this is something that keeps me up at night, as you asked for. But let's see what Brian has to offer from an Allstate perspective and his experience from a security perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Sachin. I think you kind of laid out at a very high level kind of the same things that we're concerned about. So let me just kind of drill down into a couple of them that really, keep me up, that keep me, thinking, are we as secure as we need to be, right? Being Allstate, we have a lot of personal identification information out there, right? A lot of PII data. And so, a breach, as at any major company, really hammers that brand, right? Whether it was the Experian breach that folks got access to a number of social security numbers, et cetera. So we take this stuff really serious. And if you take a look at the recent issues around some of the government systems, it was around application keys becoming compromised, right? API keys getting into the wrong hands. And so I always, one of the things that just keeps me up, I know that, these API keys are the crust in terms of how do you get into a system to that back end to make these calls to get data. If you're doing it the right way and it's not malicious, everything works fine. But when you have the malicious attacks and they get these keys, they pretty much give them the keys to the domain, right? And so once they get the keys to the domain, and if that happens, the next thing that keeps me up at night is, do we have sort of the logging and the monitoring to figure out that someone has the keys to the domain? Or are you going to figure it out too late, after the domain has been ravaged and, damage has been done to the brand, right? So PII data, the ability to protect it, the ability to protect these API keys, the ability to authenticate and make sure you've got a very strong authentication to make sure that the API consumer is someone who you want to consume your back end, the ability to monitor, these breaches, the ability to know about them before they happen. Those are the things that kind of keep me up at night. So it starts from, I know what someone needs to get into my back end. They need these credentials. What if they get them? How do I get them out quickly? You need to know that they're there. And that's one of the faults of the federal government breach, right? These folks were in that back end with these exposed API keys and no one knew that they were there. They were there sitting around doing what they wanted to do for quite a long time. And so that's what keeps me up at night. Number one, keep them out of the back end. Number two, if they get in, I need to know very quickly that something has happened and I need to resolve it very quickly. So those are some of the things. And I know, Dan, we had kind of talked in our earlier session about, how can you help, in this aspect, right? Because there's so much around what you all bring to the table from a security perspective that can help, folks like me who are up late at night wondering, if that next call is going to be the one where I need to go and deal with a breach of our APIs.
Yeah, and so what keeps me up at night is how are these attacks being carried out, and what's unique and different about it? Like, how are they being successful? Because unfortunately they are, right? There's a lot of well publicized breaches, hundreds of millions of records exposed and harvested and the like. And you talked about the Google report that cited the 80% plus of the traffic, right? There's tons of availability, right, to go target. And Gartner saying APIs are becoming, will become by next year the most frequent attack vector for breaches, right? So serious stuff here. And what we find is the types of breaches that are actually being successful look different than the kind of breaches we're accustomed to. Right. What we don't see are kind of your classic vulnerability type breaches with SQL injection style attacks and cross-site scripting and these kind of common attack approaches, right? And what we find is hackers are finding logic flaws and loopholes within your individual APIs. It's like your personal 0 days, right? That will never get discovered by a researcher or posted on a CVE or something like that. This is hackers are finding like these are the sort of weak spots, to gain access to harvest data and the like. I was talking to a big oil company recently, and again, they're embracing APIs, they're managing substations and traffic lights and you name it, and so they've got APIs all over the place. And the security guy said, every time we look under the hood of these APIs, we discover they are over permissioned. Right, and this is a common problem. It's number one on the OWASP top 10 list, right? It's access controls and the like, and so in the rush to get functionality and code out the door, security doesn't always keep up, and so these APIs have loopholes, and what hackers are targeting are logic flaws, right? Something where I can manipulate the query string, and now I'm not looking at my data, I'm looking at your data. Right, and those are really hard to find with a firewall or code scanning types of approaches, and these are the kinds of threats that are really so serious and are actually leading to the breaches that result in millions of records being exposed.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, those are all great concerns and many of the same concerns I have. And I'm also noticing that for the attendees, we're getting a lot of great questions being posted. Please continue to post those. We will address those questions at the end of the webinar. So moving on, we're all dealing with like very large organizations in many cases. So how do you deal with coordinating like the API security program from the development teams of your different business units or sub-organizations or partner organizations, things like that? And how do you bring that into the overall security practices of the organization to maintain consistency? And then, so let's start off with Byron on that. How does that work at Allstate? Because I know you have a lot of different subsidiaries, business units, and things like that that coordinate across.
Right. Yeah, it's a complex problem, right? For a big enterprise, any big enterprise, whether it's Allstate or any other big enterprise, especially if it's an enterprise that's constantly, looking to bring on new companies, right? Companies that are doing things a little differently and work them sort of into their network. And so, there's a centralized security organization that you would have within an enterprise, and what we have at Allstate. But more important, specifically to APIs, one of the things that we did was set up the API Center for Enablement, right? And so this is sort of the center point in terms of where we are putting together what are the best practices, what are the authentication methods that every API is going to use when it's exposed internally or externally. And so having this centralized organization that's fed from the bottom up, meaning that you've got the folks who are writing the APIs, the API producers are involved in the best practices, talking about the best practices. Sometimes you'll have a case where, we think it's okay to do something, and, we run it up the flagpole to the security team, and the security team's like, nope, you can't do that. It's like, what do you mean you can't do this? It's as secure can be. Nope, we're not going to allow you to do that, right? And so we appreciate the stringent aspect that Allstate has on security, because again, a company of this magnitude, a breach is a definite hit on the brand, right? And so we adhere to some things that we think are over secure, but at the end of the day, give me the over secure network functions than the ones that are, as Dan say, because things are a little different now. It's not your normal hacks, right? They come from you in different ways that you don't even have your guards up for, right? And so, we appreciate that. But from our perspective, it's helping to centralize these things, expand these things out with a API Center for Enablement to make sure that every API that's coming up from these organizations that are going to be exposed externally or internally, are as secure as possible. And so we take that very serious around the enterprise.
Great. Yeah. And Sachin, how about at Google? How do you handle that across maintaining that consistency of the security posture?
I think one of the ways that Brian talked about was really what most of the customers are doing when it comes to coordinating the communication between BUs, internal, external partners, is by the means of the portal platform, which is more of a consumption-based platform wherein you catalog your APIs, you enable how you want to onboard the communication between these various channels. But one thing that I've often heard from our customers with respect to the security concerns or threat in those scenarios are, number one, sensitive data exposure. I know Dan talked about it, but I just want to touch upon it again from a different perspective or a different lens. And this typically happens when in an application or service with multiple level of access, users of lesser privileges, they are accessing information of the users which belong to a higher level privilege, right? So that's where the concept, we need to implement concept of least privilege. And a good API management solution, it will provide you capabilities to mitigate those kind of risks or threat, wherein you can implement one-way TLS, two-way TLS. You have data masking capabilities as a measure to mitigate this. One thing which is really important is continuous entitlement reviews, so that you can know how those APIs or how those data are being accessed by which users, so on and so forth. So sensitive data exposure is number one, and the most common threat or concern that we have heard from our customer. Second is around weak authentication and session management. I know, Dan, you touched upon it as well. And the way we see it is it's not a product or a platform challenge, it's an implementation problem. So organizations, we need to factor in the fact that we need to take a layered approach. Just implementing API key validation should not be sufficient. So we need to have a layered approach wherein we should complement API key validations with maybe implementing OAuth or JSON Web Tokens to help protect against vulnerability which are coming not only from internal but also from external users as well. Then what do you have to say?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? The only common thing about APIs across an organization seems that there's not much in common, right? Every API has a unique purpose, audience, objective, security requirements, and so forth. And it's actually interesting. We just got a question I'm seeing here about, having multiple teams, multiple APIs, different services, how to keep track of all the latest versions, what's open, what's available. And so, yeah, how do you solve that when it is such a, sort of a heterogeneous kind of environment? And I think, there's some obvious best practices. Like one is, put some management around the APIs, right? Have a platform like an Apigee that will, help you manage the APIs, to set policies and rules, and to have, good definitions about the APIs and what's available, and really a central repository for it. So I think that is there's a reason why those tools are so incredibly valuable, and we've seen such a wide adoption of them. From a security perspective, unfortunately, the sort of state of the art for finding vulnerabilities in APIs has often been highly manual, and that is pen testers and red teams. And I've spoken with a lot of these folks, right? It's literally sitting down and reverse engineering APIs and looking at the calls and then crafting tests that might pressure test the API and find leakage and so forth. But we really strongly believe that with the complexity of APIs, the amount of surface area, I mean, if you have an API with 50 endpoints, that's not that big, right? Every endpoint has a put, a get, a delete, and so forth. Now you've got 200 different combinations. Then you look at all the different OWASP type of threat vectors. You need thousands of tests to really adequately evaluate and assess the security of your API. And you're not getting there with manual approaches. It's simply not possible. I actually really like this quote from a friend, Corey Ball, who's writing a book called Hacking APIs. And he says, if you write the world's most secure API, but don't test it, don't worry, some hacker out there will do it for you, right? Because that's what they're doing. That's what they're looking for is these sort of loopholes that exist within the API. So, we strongly recommend an automated testing platform, something that will actually scale and run at the speed of DevOps, right? That will actually, evaluate every corner of that API, no matter what the API is. And then most importantly, not just evaluate kind of classic security, like, is there a SQL injection vulnerability, but will actually pressure test the logic. And specifically things like, is it possible for user A to impersonate user B, like the token example that Byron mentioned, and gain access to someone else's data, right? Are there controls in the API to prevent that kind of thing from happening? Because for sure, that's what the hackers are looking for.
Yep. Yeah, and then following up on what you were saying earlier, Dan, and then in response to the audience question about like the discoverability and management of this, it's critical to also incorporate into your CI/CD process a publishing of your API documentation to some sort of central developer portal, so that everybody has a single source of truth about what APIs are available, where they're located at, who's responsible for them, things along those lines. And I want to give Sachin and Byron a chance to talk about as well, like how do you handle like organizing and managing like APIs across the business units that you've seen?
Yes, I mean, the most common way that we have seen, as I talked about, was putting a governance layer at an API layer and abstracting your API infrastructure from your backend systems and from the front-end system, so that It acts as a glue between your clients and your target backend systems, and it provides you with the capability so that you can do centralized governance at an API infrastructure or an API platform layer. So, and that's where capabilities like how do you want to onboard your developers, right? The API developers and as well as the application developers, which can be internal, external, it can be your partners, so on and so forth. So you can standardize that particular approach in terms of how you want to go about onboarding those. Second, I mean, how do you want to go about documenting your APIs? Because if I want to, as a customer, I want to leverage your API, I do not want to be bottlenecked by limited information which is available for that particular API. So that's where you need to have capabilities wherein you can provide strong documentation. And as a developer, I can try out those APIs at a central location itself, which will be your developer portal. Thirdly, version management, right? Change management, revision control, that plays a real critical role when it comes to API, because your APIs tend to change frequently depending upon how your source and target systems are behaving. So that's where you need a strong governance platform which can give you the capability to do those governance almost in a real-time fashion. And these are some of the best practices that we have been working with our customers who have been really successful on the API journey and who have taken API first approach, wherein which is more focused towards consumption rather than I will say the production side of the house.
Yeah, that's pretty good, Sachin. And so, you know, hearing what you said, I resonated with it. But in reality, a lot of enterprises do the governance after the fact, right? It's like, we got to get these APIs out. You know, the business is calling for them. You know, I'm trying to make some money. You know, let me get my APIs out and I'll come back and fix some things, right? It's kind of like, you know, there's not a such thing as a fast follow to poor documentation, right? Once an API consumer tries to consume an API and that documentation is bad, they'll go elsewhere. There's a number of APIs that do a lot of things, and they'll go elsewhere and find an API that's got better API documentation. So the governance part of it, unfortunately, is sort of left to the end. And it's not until you realize, oh my God, I've got all these APIs out there in the industry. They all look different. The developers are kind of, you know, confused about when to use what, how to use what. And so having a governance that's a bottom-up governance, not a top-down governance, not a governance where there's a committee of 5 people who will get bottlenecked to say, okay, you can do this or you can't do this. Having these things built into your tools, having governance built into best practices around how you do things that are enforced by your pipelines, right? That's where we are at Allstate. That's what we're working on. You know, if we've got a set of best practices, we don't want to have an API producer go to a committee and say, here's my API, am I adhering to the best practices? That's governance. You know, it's not the best type of governance. You know, we'd rather you upload your API. Let me see your YAML file. Upload your YAML file and take a look at the output that comes when you try to upload that YAML file and produce that API to the back end. That's where you need to bank your governance in, because now everyone is seeing the same thing. There's no subjectivity there. And if an API is blocked for some reason, then you have that conversation, because governance and best practices may change. It may be that API really needs to do this, and this is why. And so now there's an exception to that, and you have to allow for those exceptions, right? And so I see a lot of enterprises waiting to the end to figure this out. And this is something that has to be baked in. The security of your system depends on it. The ability to deliver a consistent, easy to use set of APIs depends on it as well. So one of the questions to me specifically was around maturity and governance and framework, right? And so my answer to that is yes, that's what we're building here at Allstate. We are building it into the ecosystem. API producers should be able to update their API, produce those APIs, upload them, and determine whether or not we're going to allow that, not from a body of people, but from the tools that say, aha, you've got a vulnerability here. We can't allow this right here. You don't have this. Your documentation is missing this, right? And have them reiterate on it so that we can deliver the best set of APIs to the API producers. So that's kind of how we're addressing that here at Allstate.
Yeah, Dan, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, you sparked a thought there, Byron, which is that we get to talk to a lot of different organizations, and it's a little bit Wild West out there when it comes to APIs, right? We talk to folks. Do you have a gateway? Do you have a platform? Do you have documentation? Some do. Some have absolutely nothing. I remember talking to one company. They have published APIs. Their customers can use it, download data, all this kind of thing. And they said, hey, by the way, we also have a bunch of unpublished APIs. So if you want to look at the calls that are coming back and forth from the portal, go ahead, use them at your own risk, right? And they literally advised, people like, those exist, and so really kind of a free for all in some cases. So then talking to like to build on that governance question, I've talked to like auditors and assessors and this sort of thing, and there aren't a lot of regulations yet that say, here's what you have to do for APIs, right? There's plenty around vulnerability scanning and web app scanning, and those are clearly encompassing APIs as well. But most of these frameworks start with a risk assessment, right? And if an auditor sees or an assessor sees you've got APIs, that needs to be incorporated into your risk assessment. And that means, understanding what kind of risk does that pose and what kind of mitigation, actions and controls and capabilities are you implementing to contain that risk, right? And so I think this is a bit of a new territory for a lot of folks, right? The APIs are still, somewhat new, and the extension of our risk frameworks and our risk assessments to cover the APIs is still playing catch up.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So, I think this is a really good point. I saw like another really great audience question come in, but I think it'd also be a great time to just kind of take a little pause and let it pop up while we discuss this other question from the audience, which I think is a really critical one from a security standpoint, is what's everybody's perspective on the use of IP whitelisting as a security measure on your APIs? Is that sufficient, or is there better ways of doing it? What are the limitations and drawbacks of that? My personal opinion on this is just that, IP whitelisting is a good first step, but it shouldn't be what you base your API security on. You really need to base it on almost a zero trust model, which I'm a really big fan of. But I want to kind of open that up to the panel, see what are your guys' thoughts and what are you seeing related to IP level security on APIs.
I can take an initial stab and then pass it over to Dan or Byron.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to whitelist, as you mentioned, Sean, I mean, it should be complemented with additional security measures, because standalone, it should not be sufficient to provide you a strong security posture, because some clients may not have fixed IP addresses, right? So, for example, clients connecting from a home network, right? They may get varied IP for their providers, right? Or they may connect from multiple IP addresses. So, as an organization, it will be really tough for you to take a collective list of IPs that you need to whitelist in order to secure your backend systems or secure your APIs. So again, this is a good starting point, but it needs to be complemented with additional security capabilities. Again, going back to the same concept, so that we can provide layered security. For example, geofencing could be a good complement to whitelisting IPs, wherein you can take that call in a real-time fashion in terms of where the traffic is coming from. I mean, whether is that a legit traffic, or is this some kind of a bot generating some kind of a DOS or a DDoS kind of a traffic, right? So that is what we think from a security perspective, to have multiple layers of security, because we just cannot rely on one security measure and consider it as the de facto security mechanism. Byron, Dan, what do you think?
I'm spot on with you there, Sachin. One thing the analogy that I use is like your password, right? When they say, please set your password, and you start setting your password, and all of a sudden it goes yellow, and you're like, okay, it's good. But if you add a special character and a number and some odd things, it goes green. It says now you've got a strong password. That's kind of where I would equate IP whitelisting. It's in the yellow, right? It's a good method and good technology, but it's not green. And so when Sachin talks about adding some other things to it, that's when you turn IP whitelisting green. We consume APIs here at Allstate as well. And so not every enterprise is on the same level of security. So we'll have enterprises that we're trying to consume their APIs say, well, I do this with IP whitelisting. Can you give me a list of your IP addresses? right? And we cringe a little bit, right? And we kind of, say, is there another way that we can do this? Do you have OAuth? Do you have this? Do you have that? Not telling them how to secure their platform, but letting them know that that may not be enough, right? That's the yellow, right? And if you can add something to it to get it green, you strengthen your security model. So IP whitelisting is definitely, we can't say that it's not secure. There is a level of security there, just like there is a level of security when you type in that password and all you have is 5 letters and 1 number. It's yellow. Now you add a special character, it's a little bit darker yellow, right? Add another special character and a number and a capital and a lowercase, now it becomes green. And that's what Sachin is saying. You got to get it to the green. But IP whitelisting has its pros and cons, but it is something that is out there in the industry, and it does have some level of security. I call it yellow security.
And I'll just add quickly on that. I mean, it's I think we've been talking about defense in depth, right? So having layers of security, and this is a perfectly good one. But it's got limitations, right? If you've got a finite number of API users, then you can whitelist all their APIs. But if you're Allstate, and you've got 20 million subscribers, right? Each potentially using an API, that becomes impractical. And the other thing is, I won't name the company, but there's a large shipper in the country that had an API that required authentication in order to track shipments. And it turned out that somebody discovered they could manipulate the query string, increment an ID by 1, and suddenly they were looking at other people's shipments and did that 60 million times and harvested, massive amounts of data, all from an authenticated account, right? That would have been a whitelisted IP potentially, right? This person had a legitimate access that then chose to abuse the API, right? And so that zero trust model that Sean's talking about is so critical, right? Because you just never know, where that attack's going to come from. It could be even an authenticated user, especially if you have a large, customer base or potential users of your API. The zero trust model is absolutely critical.
Right, and I would just like to add on to that one other perspective that I've seen. If you only have like a one-to-one or a small number of connections between your APIs that you can really limit that, then the IP whitelisting is manageable. But if you get into a situation where you have a large number of customers or external users with a large number of IP addresses that you manage, that has both management implications, like how do you track and know that all the IP addresses are still valid and proper for use? How do you make sure you're removing the invalid IP addresses? How do you make sure you're adding in new IP addresses into that list? It becomes a significant management overhead if that's your sole mechanism of measure. And then if there's a case like a very, very large number of IP addresses, that can have performance implications on your API stack as well, because you have to do that pattern matching. Is this an authorized IP address before the request can even be processed? So other things to be thinking about. So cool. Let's go ahead and put up that poll real quick, and then see if we have any other questions, and just try and wrap things up here. We have about 8 minutes left or so to finish things up. Well, that's an interesting question. It's like, what's everybody's thoughts on this question? It's like, my personal feeling is, have you had a security breaches? Even if you answer no, the answer is probably yes. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, again, monitoring is key. And I'm assuming this poll is saying that that they actually got in and got some information. And so my guess is that that's probably happening to the point where some people may not even know that they were breached, right? Because you don't have the right monitoring and different things to say, hey, my system has been breached, right? But if you have a system that's actually secure, that you're monitoring and you know what's going on, you kind of can answer this question relatively definitively in terms of yes or no. And at least as long as I've been at Allstate, I've only been here for 4 years, there hasn't been a major security breach that that I'm aware of in terms of the things that are being exposed. Again, Allstate is a regulated business. It has the PII data is taken very seriously, and so security is a top concern within an insurance company, banking, the fintech and insurtech industry.
Yep. Cool. Sachin or Dan, do you have any thoughts on the question of pull about security breaches and awareness of that? I completely agree with Byron's statements. Like, if you're not monitoring, there's no way to know for sure.
Yeah, I'd jump in. It's pretty well known. I mean, I guess how you define breach. I mean, every company suffers attacks on a daily basis, whether they're automated and scripted or something more targeted, advanced persistent threat and the like. But what I found interesting around APIs is the volume of documented, publicized breaches. These are often quite exceptional. High volumes of records being accessed, and very reputable companies that have very strong security programs getting breached. And so it's happening for sure. And clearly, our security capabilities need to mature and advance in order to find more of these vulnerabilities and to be able to plug those holes, because the attackers are absolutely going to find where the best ROI is for their hacking efforts, and APIs are looking quite promising for them.
Yeah, and it looks like from our poll, it looks like we got about 50% of the attendees have had a security breach, and the other 50% have not. So it's an interesting split for me to see. So in the last few minutes that we have here, I wanted to kind of jump ahead a little bit about and delve into the topic of, like, how do we leverage our DevOps programs and our CI/CD processes to help ensure the security of our APIs that we're developing and deploying to different within our organization, or to authenticate and build into our other business processes. So I want to kind of open that up to the panel. Let's maybe start off with Byron on this. Actually, I'll change it up. Start with Dan today on this one.
Right. Sure. No, it's actually really interesting because APIs have changed kind of the nature of how we push code out, right? When it's not once or twice a year or even monthly, it's nightly code builds, right? I think I've heard Amazon pushes 100,000 changes a day or something crazy like that. And security testing has often been like a pen test that happens a few times a year, right? CISOs cannot tell the CEO, hold on, we can't push to production, got to wait for security to finish its job. It doesn't work. And so the only way to really make this work is for security to move and operate at the speed of DevOps. And that means finding ways to integrate it into CI/CD pipelines, for security to get woven into the development process. And that's really the goal, right? Because we can't slow down development. We can't slow down the pushing to production. And so tools and technologies and automation are critical to actually being able to achieve that goal of baking in security into the development cycle. We can't rely on reactive kind of, sort of in production, firewalling and the like, right? It's too late, right? The vulnerabilities are out there waiting for someone to discover at that point. So we need to weave in security into that CI/CD pipeline. Sachin, I'm curious your take as well from the Apigee perspective.
Absolutely, Dan. So as you rightly mentioned, right? So whether we talk about CI/CD or DevOps, we all know that it's an overarching model for improving the speed to delivery, as you talked about. So that's where agility comes into the play. But with automation in play, developers now can push changes more frequently, while operation teams see greater stability, greater agility. But at the same time, this presents some challenges as well, and that's what I want to talk about here, so that our attendees can take care of that while they are developing their CI/CD pipelines, so on and so forth. So Security tests, whether you talk about static application security test, whether you talk about dynamic application security test, you talk about software configuration analysis test, all these kind of testings need to be built in into the CI/CD pipeline process, right? Having said that, they will have a role to play at different stage, but they need to be built into the CI/CD process. But while you are doing that, one thing that we need to take care of is how do we address the security misconfigurations, because these are something which can be easily overlooked while you are building that into the CI/CD process, and that is the placeholder for introducing vulnerabilities or weakness into your processes. So I'll end up with a comment that while you are developing your CI/CD pipeline or DevOps process and you are integrating these kind of security tests into the process, make sure that we take care of security misconfigurations are not overlooked. And any API management solution, Dan, you talked about APIG, allows you the granular control and continuous monitoring of the security configuration, so that you cannot totally eliminate it, but you can mitigate the risk which are associated with the DevOps or CI/CDs.
Yeah, piggybacking on what Sachin is saying, regardless of whether you're doing homegrown APIs or using an API management solution, whether it be APIG or one of the other platforms, building into your CI/CD processes, automated checks to verify that your standard security policies and approaches are being applied to your APIs as they're going through the development cycle is an important key piece. And Byron, and I'll let you wrap up here in the last minute or so that we have on the for thing here.
Yeah,
I think things are done.
Yeah, I think on a wrap up for me, I just want to kind of address one of the questions that came up in terms of what are some of the best places in terms of getting trained and resources about API security. There's a vast amount of security, and when you think about internet security, you can remove the adjective that describes the type of security. Is it API security? Is it backend security? Security is important in terms of the telecommunications, the infrastructure, the Internet of Things. It's pretty much the same around how do you find the best training and the best resource, specifically the certification trainings that you have for security. Those are always great because they are transferable across whatever the security that you're talking about. So if it's a Cisco certification, if it's a cloud security certification, all those are great. API Academy is another resource that I use quite often. They have some good trainings out there. I always look for free first. I'm a free first type of guy, and so I look at the free content and then start drilling down on YouTube around security, because there's a great deal of content that you can find just on the open internet around security from some pretty reliable folks in the industry too. So, that's kind of how I go about it. If I get the company to pay for some training, then of course, it's not free first. I'll pay for some of the training from some of the accredited places, to try to continue to keep myself abreast on what's happening, because you gotta continuously train yourself, because the hackers don't sleep. They're out there, and you got to be prepared. So just didn't want that question to go unanswered, but those are some of the resources that I use in terms of keeping myself up on what's happening in the security topics.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much, Byron. And one resource I would like to add onto that is making sure going to OWASP.org. They're an open source group kind of collating best practices for web application and API security. So it's a really great resource to just learn what common vulnerabilities and common mitigation processes are. And that's a free resource for everybody as well. So I do want to thank everybody, especially our panelists, for their time today and their great insight. And I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for the fantastic questions that you've submitted. Any questions that we didn't answer during this session, we will follow up directly with you on offline. And then we will also be sending out the recording of today's session to everybody that attended. So thank you very much for your time today, everyone.
Yep, thanks everybody. Enjoyed it.
Have a good one.
All right, bye y'all.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.